Bear with me one moment while I get up my slides. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for that warm welcome. Having heard from Stephen about some of the benefits of electric vehicles, and I guess conscious of the fact that London's environmental advisor, Martin Powell, will be giving a presentation tomorrow which will touch on some of the details of our EV plan, I wanted to concentrate this afternoon on some of the more practical learnings that we've had from our EV program up until now, I guess focusing on what's worked and perhaps what hasn't worked quite so well. I guess like most of us here, the two fundamental drivers of looking at an alternative to fossil fuel vehicles has been climate change and air quality in London. London's carbon footprint, you can see on the right-hand side there, totals around about 44 million tonnes each year. And transport is responsible for around about 20% of that, some 10 million tonnes each year. Looking at how that's broken down, cars are responsible for half, freight a quarter, and various forms of public transport about 5% each. Similarly, transport plays a very significant role in air quality problems in London. Poor air quality is estimated to be responsible for around about 3,000 premature deaths in London each year, and two pollutants cause most of the problems, particulate emissions and nitrogen dioxide. Traffic's responsible for about 80% of all PM10s in central London and around about 40-odd% of NOx emissions. So clearly, you can see the link between London's road network and the highest concentrations of both of these pollutants. I think it's quite clear that something has to be done. The question is what? Now, clearly, we can go some way to reducing the size of the problem by encouraging people to walk, cycle, and make use of public transport more often. And in fact, in London, we've had quite a lot of success with this. We've seen a mode shift of about 6% away from car to public transport in the last decade or so. But realistically, many Londoners will continue to use their cars. We just can't get away from that fact. So we need to find a way to make sure that motoring becomes less damaging to the environment. And looking at the options available, London believes that EVs are the best bet. They provide immediate environmental benefits and then also the prospect of much greater climate change benefits in the future as the grid decarbonises. And I guess critically, the principal barrier to the uptake of electric vehicles, battery range, is less of a problem in cities. If you look at this chart, you can see that about 95% of all daily car journeys in London are well within the range of the EVs coming to market in the very near future. So if adopted at scale, electric vehicles can play a really big role in trying to tackle these environmental issues of climate change and air quality. But as with anything new, there's considerable uncertainty. And while that uncertainty persists, there will be hesitation, and as a result of that, investment in and commitment towards electric vehicles will be slower and less extensive than what's required to achieve scale quickly. The key to accelerating adoption of electric vehicles in our cities is to rapidly build confidence amongst all of the stakeholders that are participating. Consumers will only part with their cash if they think that they're getting a better value for money, if they think that there's charging infrastructure in place, if they think that the vehicles are going to be reliable. Similarly, auto manufacturers need to be convinced that governments will support the industry long enough until they can turn a profit. Infrastructure manufacturers need to be convinced that they can invest in product development. Infrastructure hosts need to see some type of benefit either for themselves or for their customers. Utilities need to see the imperative to invest to address bottlenecks in electricity supply. Financiers need to see that they're going to turn a profit at reasonable risk. And government needs to be convinced that it can support policies that, at least in the short term, will only apply to a relatively small percentage of the electorate. If you can work together to build confidence amongst all of these stakeholders, you end up with a virtuous, reinforcing, positive message here, something that makes people act more quickly than what they might do otherwise. So how have we gone about trying to build confidence in London? Firstly, we've been really public with our support for electric vehicles. Our mayor frequently gets up and says he wants London to be the EV capital of Europe. We've also published targets for both the number of electric vehicles that we want to have in London, but also for the rate of infrastructure deployment. By making very public statements and personal commitments towards this, the mayor has invested significant political capital. And as a result of that, both businesses and local authorities feel that they can make similar commitments without the mayor sort of stepping away at some point in the future. There'll be continuity of political support. But uncertainty can only be eroded and confidence built if ambition is underpinned by credibility. You need to have robust answers to the fundamental questions about the electric vehicle market. And for many, that question is, who will buy electric vehicles? And the follow-on question, where do those people live? So we've tried to answer this question as succinctly as we can do. We have a target of 100,000 electric vehicles in London by 2020. And while to some this sounds ambitious, it must be remembered that that represents only 5% of all the vehicles registered in London. Therefore, we need to be very targeted in trying to identify likely early adopters. Our hypothesis has been that people that currently own electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles and people with traits or characteristics very similar to those people will be the same people that then will go on and buy the next generation of electric vehicles that hit the market from the beginning of next year. We've done some customer segmentation analysis. It was sort of first developed by the supermarkets, actually, to try and better understand who currently owns electric vehicles and hybrids in London. Based on various socio-economic characteristics, Londoners can be split into about 60 different groups. And if you look at EV ownership, 75% of all EVs, or near enough to, come from just 5 of those groups. If you look at hybrid ownership, those same 5 groups account for about 60% of all the vehicles owned. And if you look at London as a whole, those 5 groups account for only 25%. So as a starting point, at least, it seems to make sense to try and target people from these groups. They mostly live in a band that starts in North London, extends through central London, and goes out towards the southwest. Perhaps unsurprisingly, they're amongst the most wealthy people in London. So by identifying some particular customer segments that look promising and filtering further, focusing on locations where you've got off-street parking, areas where people often own more than one car, and also looking at areas of London where people drive a significant amount, but not too far, you're able to paint a very clear picture of what you think electric vehicle ownership might look like in London in the near future. And that clear picture of the target market has helped us to lay a foundation upon which confidence has been developed, and as a result, we've been able to develop very strong partnerships with a number of different stakeholders in London. Now, the EV ecosystem is way too complicated, and it's demonstrated on that slide, for any one stakeholder to really control it. So effective partnerships, often between stakeholders that traditionally haven't worked together, will be required in order to get the type of infrastructure that we need in place to support electric vehicles. So on both the supply side and the demand side, you've got utilities, retailers, technology and IT companies, car manufacturers and government, and they've all got a role to play. This schematic just shows some of our partners. You can sort of pick out some big brand names amongst them. Some of these have agreed to match fund infrastructure in London. All these stakeholders have been involved from the outset, and a real effort has been made to try and understand what their motivations are and what they want out of this, both now but in the longer term as well. By learning together from the outset, it's possible to overcome the fear of acting on your own and to sort of deal with both real and perceived risk. It's also very important to try and pick your partners carefully. This map shows the location of a supermarket that we're partnering with in London. By collaborating with just the one partner, we're able to try and get charging points within 3 miles of the vast majority of London's population. The ultimate goal is to try and get a charging point within 1 mile. Similarly, by working with multiple partners, you can develop a really dense network as well. This is an example from the London Borough of Barnet. However, working with new and diverse partners also brings with it challenges, and we're still trying to overcome some of these. One of the big challenges has been around procurement processes, and anyone from Europe will know that there's a very particular process that we have to go through, which means that by the time that you've advertised, analysed tenders, and finally awarded a contract, many months can pass. And that's an order of magnitude slower than businesses often, and they get very frustrated and don't understand that. Similarly, we have very different perceptions of risk. The public sector doesn't like risk. We're worried about what tomorrow's newspaper headline is going to be. Business likes risk. You have to take risks to make profit. So as a result, there's another tension there that we need to sort of overcome as we move forward. And then finally, you need to build a consumer incentive and a consumer confidence. People need to believe that they're not going to be out of pocket if they buy an EV. Most of you would be familiar with the congestion charge in London. From next year, it'll cost you £10 to enter central London. We've exempted electric vehicles from the congestion charging zone, and that's a policy that's working already. London has about 10% of all the has 10% of all the registered vehicles in the UK, but has about 60% of the electric vehicles. So you can see it's already starting to have an impact. Public funding needs to be really targeted, though. We're running out of money, like many parts of the world. Public sector funding will be very limited for several years to come. So you need to invest in areas which will make the most difference. And charging point integration is one of the areas which I think that makes the most sense. By the end of this year, early next year, we'll have in place a pan-London scheme, charging points which are accessible using a single smart card, no matter where you are, trying to simplify the user experience for people. That's a role that the public sector can take on, where the private sector would struggle over time to get there. So to conclude, confidence is key. London's found that credible ambition, partnership, informed and motivated consumers, and focused investments are all required to achieve this. We're only at the beginning of our efforts. We've got lots more mistakes to make. Hopefully we'll have a chance to share some of those with you, along with some of the wins that we get along the way as well. I wish you all the very best in your efforts to promote EVs in your cities as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you, London, for sharing. Now, what's